A neuron, also known as nerve cell, is an electrical excitable cell that takes up, processes, and transmits information through electrical and chemical signals. It is one of the basic elements of the nervous system. A typical neuron is divided into three parts: the cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. The cell body, the center of the neuron, extends its processes called the axon and the dendrites to other cells. It contains the nucleus of the cell that carries all the genetic material. Dendrites are the bushy branches of a neuron. Their main function is to receive information from other neurons. The axon is a fine, cable-like projection that can extend over enormous distances. The function of the axon is to transmit information from one neuron to another. Some axons are covered with a layer of fatty acids known as the myelin sheath. The axon contacts other cells through structures named synapses. The electrical impulse mostly arrives on the dendrites, gets processed into the cell body to then move along the axon. The axon functions merely as an electric cable, simply transmitting the signal. Once the electrical signal reaches the synapse, a special molecule called neurotransmitter is released by the neuron. This neurotransmitter will then stimulate the second neuron, triggering a new wave of electrical impulse, repeating the mechanism all over again. Now we will talk about the physiology of a neuron. Take yourself for example. When you want to move, you move. When you want to stop, you stop. This is thanks to the neurons in your nervous system. But how does it work? Neurons aren't active all the time. When a cell is firing, it is in action, but when it is not firing, it is at rest. The resting potential of a neuron is the condition of the neuron when it is resting. There is still potential for it to fire, but it is not firing at the moment, which is why it is called the resting potential. It is at rest at -70 millivolts. The intracellular space is the inside of the neuron, and the extracellular space is the outside of the neuron. The extracellular space is more positive because it contains more sodium, which is represented by the blue M&Ms. The intracellular space is more negative because it contains more potassium, which is represented by the orange M&Ms. There are channels that allow ions to flow through the membrane of the cell. There is a leaky ion channel which allows for potassium to flow in and out of the cell, which accounts for the lower ratio for potassium being pumped into the cell on the sodium-potassium pump. The sodium-potassium pump pumps 3 sodium into extracellular space and 2 potassium ions into intracellular space. Sodium does not leave with ion channels, it only leaves with the sodium-potassium pump. Now what happens when a cell fires? If you decide you want to start running, a cell fires and becomes active, causing action potential. This threshold for it to fire is -55 millivolts to +40 millivolts for the gates to open. As the electrical impulse passes the sodium gate, sodium will rush intracellular space, causing depolarization in a more positive intracellular space. At this point, the sodium-potassium pump continues to pump 3 sodium out and 2 potassium in. Then the electrical impulse will reach the potassium gate, which allows for potassium to rush from intracellular to extracellular space, which is repolarization, returning the intracellular space to be more negative. After repolarization, the nerve cell enters a state of hyperpolarization, which is an undershoot of negativity in the intracellular space. The cell then returns to its resting potential by the constant flow of the leaky ion channel.